Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Karen Humeniuk. Karen is the author of East of Midnight. This is Karen's first novel, and in it, she explores the nature of choice, those arising from self-interest, and those wonderful choices that arrive through the kindness, love, and wisdom of friends. Karen is a native of North Carolina, and she and her husband, John, live in Greenville, South Carolina. She earned a bachelor's degree in biology and then worked in cancer research and clinical microbiology before earning a master's in landscape architecture. That is a huge shift. She is now retired and enjoys doting on her grandchildren. Karen, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
So you are retired, except you are a full-time grandmother. Do your grandchildren have a name for you, I should ask?
Mimi.
Mimi. All right.
Yeah.
I think all grandparents have names. Upa, Grandma, Grams. I think my sister is Uma or something like that. But Mimi, love it. So you're retired, full-time grandma, and you wrote a novel. So how long ago had this story been percolating in you and you decided, it's time to write that book I've always wanted to do?
Well, I'm a little different from most people because I walked away from it for a long time. The idea first came up when my son, who's now a 35-year-old practicing physician, was when he was in high school and I faced the thought of an empty nest because he's an only child. So I thought, and I had this little idea wandering around, and I worked on it, and he graduated in 2003, and I worked on it until 2011, just kind of playing with it, but it's never really, I had gotten some compliments, I'd had test readers, but I just didn't feel that I'd be proud of it yet. And so I walked away from it, and then 2018, out of the blue, something said, here's your first chapter. This is the introduction I wanted said about the book. So I played around with the idea for a long time. I paid people to come in and do some critiques. And one of them noted, well, if these are millennials, they'd be doing X, Y, and Z. And besides, I love they caught this one, and nobody caught this one before. And one of the young millennials says, why won't you write? And that was very, very astute and caught me with my 2003 mentality before cell phones. And now there was email, but it wasn't the extent that it is today. But that's true. Kids today, the word to write is not much in their vocabulary, but to read is, and they do love to read.
Interesting. Back in 2003, so this idea of your son going off to school and just the empty nest, was that the kind of the spark of inspiration to start, albeit a very lengthy journey, but an initial start? Was that the actual spark? Is just this idea of what it means to be an empty nest?
Well, I had been writing letters to the editor. I called them opuses in 200 words or less for about 10 years before that. To our local newspaper. I would talk about pretty benign subjects, but I'd try to make them humorous. And in the process, I'd actually learn to write. Scientists and designers don't spend a lot of time in creative writing. They make a point, but they don't. Creative writing's different. But the process of writing those silly little letters to the editor was really a lot of fun. So I could say that the spark came little by little through that. And then with the thought of an empty nest, I thought, well, I got more time on my hands. What am I going to do with my time? So I started doing that. That really kind of was these little opuses in 200 words or less.
Interesting. It's interesting, too, that as a scientist, you're used to writing with a very specific outline. You can corroborate that or acknowledge that because my memory of scientific papers and whether it's, the hard sciences, the softer sciences, but there's a structure involved. And now you're in this 200 words or less letters to the editor. It takes a lot of precision and thought to put the right words in the right place and still keep it 200 words or less. So that says a lot.
Well, yeah, I had somebody one time who was in literary, I'm not sure it was journalism or what it was. And I described that and kind of sniffed and walked away. And 5 minutes later, he comes back. He says, that is pretty impressive to make a point and to keep your audience to the end of it in 200 words. And to have them then say, wow, I like that. And I had fun writing them because people would come up to me who didn't know me, but they knew somebody who I was with. And they would say, I don't always agree with you, but I love the way you say it. And I thought, that's the heart of it all. The heart of it all is to get across and communicate with people without offending them to the point that they turn you off, but rather that they think, that's another way of looking at it. And so that concept of literature, writing, and the creative writing side, there's always somebody when you write a story, you want to make a point. The question is, what point do you want to make? Now, that's what changes. So I had fun just venturing out on kind of topics that were just local and making them humorous. And that was fun.
Very good. Now, jump ahead. You have this wonderful career and you're at 2018 and you pick this book up again. What was that spark that, okay, I need to write this, finish it?
What it was what had stopped me all along was I had written it. I had gotten a lot of good compliments. One of the things they'll tell you when you write creatively is do not make the first chapter an information dump. Don't just go in there and tell this everything you think. And there's a real temptation to just throw everything out and just say, "Oh, I got to tell you, I got to hook you in by telling you what's coming." And instinctively, I kept listening to that lesson in my head, and I said, "This is a information dump." So I'd write it a different way. But that's still an information dump. And every time I twist and turn it, it just seemed that I had that compulsion to dump all this information in. And that's why I walked away, because I just didn't think I could do it. And I went into a kind of interesting little adventure down trying to find about Father Louis Hennepin, after whom the county of Hennepin County, which is where Minneapolis is located. I did a little study of him, and fascinating, and it really was interesting. But I realized I can't write history. Writing history, just like you said, writing a scientific document, it has constraints and it has expectations, and I couldn't do it. So I said, well, and then boom, I don't even know what it was. I can't even remember what it was. Whether somebody said something I read. But I suddenly realized that what I would do was use the first chapter to introduce the primary character. His name is Cameron. And I thought, what is it my purpose in introducing him? What is it about him that I want people to know? And the most important things to me was I wanted them to know that he was a nice guy. He likes golf, that he gets along with a lot of different people, that he's smart, and that he respects women. And in this day of the Me Too movement, what seems to be lost are all those characteristics of a man. That the guy can be, he starts out the book and he's 20, he turns 21 partway through the book, that he has good characteristics and that women appeal to him. It isn't just that he's cute and he likes to flirt. It's that he has these solid values. And that's what I used. I actually used 3 women. He has taken the other primary character, Lydia, to a party. And when he took her, he thought, I'm just going to be doing this. I have had her on my brain for these past 3 years. I need to apologize to her, but I just can't do it. And then every girl he dated, she kept interrupting in his brain, not her. She's left him alone. She's gone her way. But his image kept coming up. So I'm going to invite her to this party. And boom, he gets to the door and he realizes, oh my gosh, his knees fall apart. And see, women don't understand that that's what we can have. We have this wonderful power over men to make them go speechless.
Okay.
And that's what she does. And all she does is smile at him. And he's seen her after 3 years, and he goes, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And he blows the whole evening. And he goes off, and he's at this party. He takes on the part of being this supposed bartender. He doesn't need to be bartender. It's a self-serve. But he plops himself down there. He's running from her. And this is what men will do. It's like, I can't handle this. And there's this theory out there, oh, they go to their quiet place. I don't agree. I don't think men go off to their quiet place. I think they go off and they think, this is going to go away. If I just hold my breath long enough, if I try to do this, it'll all go away. It'll all work out. And women just go bonkers. They come up with all kinds of ideas of what's in his head. Well, that's what's happening to Lydia in the other room. She's making up all kinds of bad ideas. She's not saying a word to anybody.
We're all making up stories in our head, and and oftentimes there's not a lot of truth to those stories.
Exactly. So 3 women walk in and they talk to him. And the first woman, he doesn't know the first woman at all. And she's older, and she comes in and she essentially tells him, you are cute as a button. You're quite the talk of the women out there for why you're sitting in here. She says it's the women who are talking. She says, but I know what's wrong. She says, you know what to do with girls, but you don't know what to do with a woman. Now, when you figure out how to deal with a woman, you'll drag yourself out of here. And then she turns around and leaves. The next woman comes in. She was in a class with him. He doesn't remember her, but she remembers him. And she tells the story about what he did. She said, you spoke for all of us. You told that teacher, she had been nailing this girl. The teacher had been belittling the girl. The professor had been belittling the girl. And he just stood up and basically the professor calls upon him, and he just says what everybody else is thinking. And he does it with a plum and a smile and sits back down or does whatever he does, and they're all silently cheering him. And this is what she tells him. She says, we were all silent saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. Because there are situations in which you're just really happy that somebody else says what you think, because they've got the confidence to say it and walk away and not be upset, not tear the person apart in a nasty way, but with savvy sarcasm. So he says to her, thank you, and next time we meet, I will remember you. So she leaves. The next woman he knows very well. She's the date of his best friend, and she comes in and she basically says, you better be glad that I came in here because Seth was ready to jerk a knot in you. And so they have this little conversation. But in each of these, you see a progression of who he is, and you see the depth of his character. And so when they finish talking, he says, you're right. And he says to himself, I slithered into this hole. It's time for me to walk out. And there are so many men that think that way, that they've had time to sit back and assess things, and they know, okay, A, B, C, I've got to go and face what is due to me. And he goes out and he sits and he talks to Lydia. But he's simply no better at solving the whole problem. And so he takes her home, and when she closes the door and says goodbye, he knows he's blown it. There's your first chapter.
Oh, my. You have me wondering how the rest of this book kind of transpires. And that's the beauty of the podcast, is you don't have to give all the little secrets away. And when you were writing this book, is this all the imagination? Is this partial life experience? Did you know somebody like the central character, Cameron? What was the kind of the spark there that created these types of characters?
The spark, I like to think in terms of the spark like the plot from beginning to end, like a clothesline. When I was a little girl, my father ran a clothesline between 3 big, huge pine trees in my backyard. And I don't know why I was always fascinated by this triangle in my backyard until one day it got struck by lightning. And lightning went and ran all the way, went through 2 sides of that triangle and zapped each of the 3 different pine trees. And I don't know why, but it always struck me as a way to tell a story. One of the things I should have done a better job of projecting about the story is to emphasize it's a Southern story. And Southerners are really good at telling a story. And a story has a structure to it. And there's the thin line of the plot, and that is any one of the situations when I was a little girl and I was Lydia. Obviously, I wasn't Cameron. I was Lydia, and I would have a crush on somebody because, see, Lydia has a crush on him. Had a crush on him, and then something goes wrong, and out of just the natural interactions of people, you make you really truly miscommunicate. And it's not that big a deal, but it's a miscommunication. And I had a crush on a guy in high school, and 2 years afterwards, he called me up and asked me out on a date. And it gave me a sense of the continuity, because I would say to my mom, oh, nobody ever asked me. Well, I was getting asked out, but it wasn't to my satisfaction. And she said, because the guy that you're going to marry doesn't know what to do with women when he's in high school. So you see, there's that part of Cameron that he knows he's cute, he can get along with girls, but he doesn't know really how to talk to her. And so it was that combination of seeing it from my side, which was Lydia, and seeing it from, believe it or not, my husband's side. Because I told him later, I said, well, my mom always told me that the guy I was dating, that I would marry, didn't know what to do with women in high school. And that was my husband said. He says, no, I was running as fast as I could from them. And that probably laid out the plot to take those two personalities of my husband and me and begin to tell more of a story. I had a friend in my mid-20s who, she was very, very perceptive for her age. She was very mature for her age. And she told me one day, she said, well, I like to collect anecdotes. And that stuck. And so beginning and then, I started collecting these little stories. So when I got this idea of writing the book, I went back to what Paula had said, and I began to pull up these little anecdotes. So some of these stories are very close to reality. Like there's a story of Lydia's aunt who becomes addicted to drugs, opioids. I wrote this in 2003, long before this came up, because my aunt had in the 50s become, 50s in the 70s, when after heart surgery, she became addicted to opioids. And my two cousins were very, very torn apart by it. She got over it and went on. And then we had another incident where I won't go into detail, but it was another opioid situation in the late 90s. It wasn't personal. It was a little more distant, but still. So I used that as a backdrop. In other words, so I took concepts of somebody becoming addicted to it where they don't intend to, but then there are these other things that come into their life, and it's sort of like the perfect storm. So, but through that, I'm able to show who Lydia is, where I show Cameron through these three women at the beginning, and then you see him, Lauren Bourne, he builds on it. You see Lydia through her loving her aunt and just being brokenhearted what her aunt goes through. So you see her depth as this background character. And I think that's what Southerners tell stories. There's never one story that just goes through. There is a story that goes through, but it's told by telling other stories along the way. So I just hung them along the clothesline.
There you go. Now, did the entire book take place in the South, or are there more locations involved and any adventure? Is this what would you classify this type of book? It's not a young adult romance novel, is it? I mean, who would be the audience?
No. I have found, which is fascinating to me, is that I wrote it for women, let's just say 35 to 90.
Okay.
And not thinking I would be attracting people in their 20s, even though the two characters are. There's enough of their family interaction to see that they really are, both of them, a part of a family. And so, for instance, I'm probably closest to Lydia's mother, and she's a very background person in there in terms of personality. I put the personalities of other people that I knew into, and really combinations of different personalities. Like Cameron's mother is such a quintessential, delightful Southern woman. There is a kind of Southern woman I could never be because my parents are from Minnesota, and I grew up in a university environment where people were from all over the nation. But I really like this woman. I like these women, and I know lots of them. So she's really a combination of many, many different characters. But going back, what was your question? I've kind of lost it.
I was just saying, that's fine. I was just, trying to figure out, this is a book of fiction. I'm thinking about the genre. Who is going to be attracted to the book? And you shared, I originally thought about women 35 to 90. That's a huge lifespan. But then you started to share that I suspect that even men were reading the book and could pull, some of the stories from the book and say, yep, I recognize this. I mean, truly not knowing how to talk to women or talk to girls. And I will say, I'm not going to give away my age. If you've listened to other podcasts, people will know my age. I'm still having trouble there, Karen. So, and it seems like Cameron's going through a journey. So a man can understand that. Young boys can understand that, as can women. It's like, I know people just like this. I know how I was. And it's just, I was curious about how did it take place in the South? Did it take place across, other locations as well?
That was yes, there were the two questions. So the answer to the first one is I wrote the book for that woman that I like so much in the South, that I have many friends who are like that. So I wrote it for that. But you're right. In one case, I gave it to a friend, and she put it down on her little to-read book. Her husband, who has since passed away, was an avid reader. He's an industrialist. I mean, he owned a textile company. He had sold it; it was bought out, and he became the CEO of another textile. This guy's he's a man of business, but he was an avid reader, and he also suffered no fools. And in the very introduction, I thank him because he picked up the book and he read it. And when Roger came back and said, I like this, I knew that was a real compliment. I knew I needed to grab hold of that. And I realized that I had a book that men liked as well. That was a definite aha moment.
That's an aha moment. Speaking of the book, are there passages of the book that you're getting a review or somebody, kind of like what Roger just said, I like this book. Is there some passages in there that totally resonate, either whether it was for you or your cadre of beta reviewers, beta readers who are just, reading the book, kind of helping you, to iron out any inconsistencies in the story? Anything jump out at you that you've heard that just totally resonates for you in the book?
Well, of the compliments that I've received, one of them did come from a national reviewer. This came from Blue Ink. They picked this out, which I was really complimented. And the passages that they picked out, because they liked the description of things. And I have heard that over and over and over again. One friend of mine said this was a book that you could get lost in, that, your world is going all around you, but when you turn to a book, you want the book to take you to someplace else. And description is very important, but it can't bury you. You can't have 5 minutes of just one description. It's got to be just like that 200-word letter. It's got to be succinct. And this was what was picked out. And this is what I'm quoting from the book. From this particular situation, it's Lydia's aunt. She's in the process of weaning herself off the drugs. So she's not lost in the fog. She's beginning to come out of it, and she's sitting in her study, and her study looks out across a lake. And this is what she describes. A strong gust of wind scrambling through the tops of the trees overhead startled her. After tossing the upper branches, it departed, dancing across the lake, whipping up whitecaps beyond the point. I thought that was it's a very minor little part of the story. And Lydia, Mara, is this background character. But you see both what she sees, but there's a feeling in it. You can just almost see the wind skipping across the lake and creating whitecaps as it goes. So I thought, wow, that's pretty good. I like that. Who wrote that?
Very good.
I couldn't have written that, did I?
You never know. So with the writing of the book, I mean, you went through a publishing house, Archway, and they're known for providing services to the writer based on what their needs are. It's not like a full service publishing house. What was it like working with them and with a publisher, with an editor, as you were kind of going through this journey, especially now that, okay, I'm committed, I'm writing this book, I'm going to set my goal by November 2019-ish, the date of the publication. I'm going to have some support here. What was it like working with that type of organization? Well,
the organization was superb. But before that, knowing that some of the people in your audience might be just beginning on this journey, I first went to a couple of writing conferences. And there are good writing conferences that are worth your time, and there's some that are not. So investigate before you go what your needs are, what the writer's need is. So I had been to a couple of writing conferences and had gotten a lot of good information about organizing the book. I didn't contact Archway, which is the publisher of my book, until after I had the aha moment that gave me that first chapter, and I wrote it up, and that's when I contacted them. So I took to them a fairly polished, a fairly intact book. My husband, before that, had been just superb. Now, they'll tell you, don't talk to your family. They will just say, oh, that's wonderful. And there are families that will do that. My husband was not that way. He wanted it to be a book. He likes to read spy novels and mystery novels and things of that sort. And Cussler would be an example. He would say, I want your book to be as good as that. So he was pretty hard on me. So the first thing is you get together your ideas and you put them down and you start pulling it together and getting it intact. And even before you're to the point of ready to sell it, go to some of these writing conferences so that you can begin to hone the skill. That's their term. Hone your skill, hone your craft. And have somebody who you trust to be really brutally honest with you. Somebody you can say, no, please stop beating on me. And yet they say, okay, but here, make it better. So you really need somebody who's going to walk with you, because you can't afford somebody who's going to do that when you're starting out. You need it to be a friend who actually works for free and for coffee. Once I got to that point and I went to Archway and I had what was a fairly intact book, they provided fabulous services. The first thing they go through and they say, what point are you at? And when they saw that I was at the end point, needing a line editor, that's what they said, because they looked at it, they read through it, and they said, okay. But this is the kind of editing you need. I didn't need that organizational editing. I didn't need that, let's get this tighter editor. I needed somebody who actually knew English grammar, because neither my husband or I had really ever taken creative writing. Oh, wait a minute. We'd never taken creative writing. All we'd ever done was read. And so they provided an editor who was absolutely fabulous and would go through and ask kind of questions. Is this what you're really trying to say? Maybe this isn't what you should say, or whatever. Or best of all, there's one point at the right at the very end of the book, when the editor had gotten obviously engrossed in the book, he says, I did not see that coming. And that was great. I was like, oh, I had even the editor, and I love that. So you need an editor, and you need an editor for your genre, because different genres require different things, like police novels. They're very different from something of what I wrote. So they were excellent for that. And then I can't even imagine putting it together myself and coming up. Now, I actually did the cover. The cover was my design, but they made it polished. They took the rougher pictures that I sent them and my suggestions, and they took the picture and they just dressed it right. Very good. You need that. And then the next thing you need is to get you out and just to take the interior, make the interior look all right and make it look good, and then take you out into the marketing section. They were superb. I cannot say enough nice things. If anybody's from Archway, go look at the list of people who helped me, and you thank every one of them, because they were fabulous.
Fantastic. Well, we will definitely put a link back to Archway in the show notes. Karen, in the time we have left, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where's the best place for them to go?
At this point, I would suggest my website. Well, it's simple. It's my last name, Humeniuk, and then K.com. So it's HumeniukK.com. That was put together by Archway, and it's a very, very nice website. I set my own up through one of these card companies. Design is one of my that's been the heart and soul of what I've done most of my life, is design, and they did a better job. Archway's is a better one than mine. It's not their first rodeo. And you know what they also did that is nearly impossible for a writer who can write a book to do, is to do it down to 25 words or less, and that sense that this is something you want to read. So if you go out on your own, yes, you do save some money, but when I look back over what this cost me, well, you're buying services.
Sure.
I got my money's worth.
Fantastic.
I really did get my money's worth. So best place to find me is on the website that they set up for me. But I also go on LinkedIn. I like LinkedIn. I'm not too good on Facebook because it just seems to get out of hand. I'm overwhelmed by it. I'm just sorry. I'm overwhelmed by it.
No worries. Well, we'll put a link back to not to Facebook. We'll put a link, back to LinkedIn. And of course, we'll have a link to the book page on Amazon as well. Karen,
let me interrupt you 1 second
Sure.
and answer one quick question you asked earlier that I did not answer.
Okay.
The book takes place mostly in North Carolina, either in the Durham Chapel Hill area or this imaginary town in western North Carolina, but it also takes place in Wyoming and not Jackson. It takes place in the Bighorns and just the base of the Bighorns.
Okay.
They're a beautiful, beautiful place to visit and a place to get away.
That's a nice, inspiring place. And is that where Cameron went off to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's where he gets an uncle who sends him out there and says, you need to get some time to think.
That's a good thinking location. That's like my ideal location, This nobody around, big open sky, and a cup of coffee, or a glass of iced tea. Not sweet tea, but iced tea.
Northern.
I learned my lesson when I went down to Alabama is you never ask for, you don't ask for iced tea because that comes back as sweet tea. You ask for cold tea, which is unsweetened. That's a lesson I will never forget. Karen, it has been a pleasure to have you on the Success Insight podcast, and we look forward to learning more about you and your work through your future books and writing, and really just being able to sit down and write that first novel. It's been a work in progress for a long time, and it's a wonderful event when you can finally see it to fruition and get the reviews for it and the acknowledgement of family, friends, and other writers as well about the story and the work you put into it. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time, too, and giving me this opportunity to share it.
Fantastic. There you have it, folks. We have just been chatting with Karen Humeniuk on the Success Insight podcast. She is the author of East of Midnight. This is her first novel, and in it she explores the nature of choice, those arising from self-interest, and those wonderful choices that arrive through the kindness, love, and wisdom of friends. So do take a look at East of Midnight. We'll provide links back to her website, humeniuk.com, as well as Karen's LinkedIn profile, and we'll have a link to East of Midnight on the Amazon website, and we'll also direct you to Archway's site as well. A number of our guests on the Success Insight podcast have also been users of the services provided by Archway. So definitely a place to go if there is a book in your future. If you enjoyed the podcast, please let us know in our comment section of our show notes on the successinsightpodcast.com website. We're also on LinkedIn, Success Insight Podcast, as well as Facebook. And we also have a Success Insight Podcast YouTube channel. And we're also on almost all of the podcast stations, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. So if you can't find us, that's an issue because we are out there and we want to hear from you. So folks, as we say every episode, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there and have a phenomenal day. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.